Hello. Could I get your attention, please? We'll be starting our next session here. So this session is titled NAN Housing Strategy, and we have two presenters for today. First of which is Michael McKay, and he is the Infrastructure and Housing Director at Anishinaabe Aski Nation and has been in the field of infrastructure and housing since 2000. Michael is originally from Bearskin Lake First Nation, which is Anishinaabe Aski Nation's First Nations. He received an advanced diploma for architectural technology from Confederation College in Thunder Bay. And our second presenter for today is Dr. Sheila McCartney, is a licensed architect and urbanist specializing in marginalized community development and housing. She received her bachelor degrees in environmental studies and professional architecture from the University of Waterloo, and has a Fulbright Scholar, Master of Design Studies, and Doctorate in Design from Harvard Graduate School of Design. An Associate Professor at the School of Urban and Regional Planning at Toronto Metropolitan University. McCartney has 10 years of housing experience in partnership with First Nations communities in Canada, working with youth and elders. She is the director of Together Design Lab, an innovative research and design lab exploring platforms that focus on contemporary interdisciplinary approaches to community and open territory design. So please welcome to the stage, Michael and Sheila.
All right, thank you for the introduction, and thank you to the housing conference for asking us to present today. So we want to pull this up. Yeah, let me get this. Yeah, so sorry. Actually, we have a note here that I'm going to I actually met Sheila through Twitter about 7 years ago. She had this interesting tweet about boil water advisories. So I thought it was interesting, so I reached out to her, and then we just started talking, and I flew down to Toronto and met with her team at Together Design Lab and heard about all the interesting work that they've had worked on for the last few years with a number of the NAN communities. So that's kind of where the partnership started 7 years ago now. So it's been a journey ever since. And so yeah, I'll get into our presentation.
Okay. So we'd like to acknowledge and thank all of our funders for their support. I guess I should probably actually change this. For their support for this project, as well as the NAN community members especially, who participated to make this possible. So you'll see on this list here, we have a research council from the federal government, that's SSHRC, the IESO, Indigenous Services Canada, and then also the National Housing Strategy under the Solutions Labs. This is quite a substantial project, so there was a number of people that supported it.
So today we will be providing an overview of the NAN housing strategy and the document we're calling the roadmap as a path forward to addressing the housing emergency within NAN. We have listened to the stories and voices of NAN community members and their experiences and housing, and have developed a strategy based on their input and feedback. After 4 years of engagement and review, we are moving forward towards implementing a vision created by NAN community members and for NAN communities for the future of housing. This vision is reflected in the development of the NAN housing strategy, which will fulfill the human right of access to adequate housing and end the collective housing emergency in Anishinaabe Aski Nation. We must move beyond government's vision of housing and make the changes that NAN community members want to see in their housing systems, including ways that support health and wellness in their communities. Any change? The NAN housing strategy recognizes that there is a continuing collective housing state of emergency that will continue to grow without further action. In 2014, the NAN Chiefs in Assembly declared this NAN-wide housing state of emergency. This declaration came as a result of decades of inappropriate intervention and led the chiefs to describe the conditions being faced in their communities as deplorable and leading to extensive health issues, short housing life, overcrowding, and extreme mold. 4 years later, in 2018, facing continued widespread housing insecurity, the NAN Chiefs in Assembly reasserted the emergency, adding the existing housing solutions have not met immediate need, have not addressed future need, and have not promoted or created wellness in the communities, and mandated the creation of the NAN housing strategy. Development of the strategy focused on community-based understandings of housing need and is rooted in local solutions developed by community members. In thinking about addressing the housing emergency declared by the chiefs, we placed a large importance on the idea of a housing strategy being community-based and based around the experiences of the community members. Housing is more than a physical structure that provides a shelter. It is where we should feel safe. It includes our family and loved ones and the land it's on and all aspects of community. Housing needs to be viewed holistically. Improving our health and well-being means building better housing and infrastructure. To understand any problem, we need to go to the roots to find out the cause of why housing isn't as safe or appropriate for our communities as it should be. And during the last few years, we have heard from communities the specific ways in which they experience the housing emergency. So here's a timeline of the strategy development. Over the past couple of years, even through the pandemic, the team developing the NAN housing strategy have engaged First Nation leadership, community members to understand the lived experiences of youth, children, adults, both young and older, with housing on reserve. The process officially began in 2018 with Resolution 1818, passed by the NAN Chiefs in Assembly, which called for a modern housing strategy that focused on community-based understandings of housing need and was rooted in local solutions developed by community members. NAN was mandated to create a strategy that reflect the lived experiences of NAN communities and develop solutions rooted in community. To create a strategy that is community-based and ensures the right of access to adequate housing in order to end the collective housing emergency in the NAN territory. So in 2018, we partnered with Together Design Lab from Toronto Metropolitan University in developing the strategy, as they have extensive experience supporting First Nations in addressing and designing housing solutions in Ontario, as well as across Canada. In 2019 to 2020, we began to listen and learn from NAN community members through various community engagements. During each visit, we sat down with leadership, housing managers, elders, education directors, health directors, health staff, youth councils, and any other community members that wanted to have their voices heard. As we visited communities and held engagements, we began to review and examine the feedback we received into various themes and recommendations. Updates on our engagements are posted on NAN's website, including newsletters, policy briefs on the work as it was completed to develop the strategy. In 2021, we started drafting the NAN housing strategy roadmap and initially had 5 themes, but through review and further discussions, the roadmap was expanded to 7 themes. The draft roadmap was reviewed by the NAN Chiefs in Assembly and the Chiefs Committee on Housing and Infrastructure before it was finally submitted in 2022 at the NAN Kiwewin Chiefs Assembly to receive its full mandate for implementation.
Thanks, Mike. So when we think about the development of the strategy, it's really important to fulfill the human right of access to housing and end the collective housing emergency in Anishinaabe Nation territory. There's 4 interrelated goals in the strategy, and these goals are foundational to our work in supporting self-determination and have supported the development of the 7 themes within the strategy roadmap. So moving forward, the vision of the strategy is creating positive change in current housing systems to support health and wellness and to fulfill the human right of access to adequate housing. I think also in particular for this audience, we're really looking at housing not as a unit of shelter, but thinking of it as a holistic system. So that there's many people with many technical skills within this room. When we engage with people around housing, we really talk to people socially about their community members, how they're living. And the basis of the strategy really comes from this understanding of whenever we would go to community, people would talk about a crisis within housing, but they would talk about it from a lived experience point of view. And then when the government talked about a crisis in housing, they talked about it from a bed sort of count and mold perspective. These 2 perspectives didn't come together. And I think that that's a key part that is the underlying foundation of the strategy, is that we're trying to reflect the lived experience of people in community and that that's so important. So to achieve our goals within the NAN housing strategy, we had 4 objectives that guided the work: to work at the community level and regional level to develop housing solutions and action plans that recognize the unique needs, geography, and cultures of First Nations communities within NAN. It's our responsibility to engage all community members and to design our methodology in a way where all community members feel comfortable participating. We asked specific questions and involved activities that were relevant to community members so that their lived experiences and hopes for the future were highlighted. We created and led community-led approaches to data collection and problem identification. So we recognize that any approach to housing solutions will need to be community-led and culturally appropriate. Otherwise, they won't work for NAN communities and will further risk extending the housing emergency itself. Third is to support the NAN First Nations right to self-determination in their housing systems. It's hard to make a strategy at a regional level while respecting self-determination of the communities themselves. So First Nations are not stakeholders. They're leaders, partners, and rights holders. And the NAN housing strategy recognizes that First Nations have the right to self-determination to their housing systems. And so our focus on creating tools and resources that support the development of these local systems through housing procurement, tendering, management, and appropriate construction designs and building techniques. The 4th is to encourage the flexibility and creation of design solutions rooted in local lived experience. We need our own design, need to design our own housing for our communities. Why have we not had that chance? Housing should reflect the values and cultures of our homelands and be safe spaces for us to create memories, is what we heard from women's councils, youth councils across NAN territory. So where have we visited? The pandemic had a slight effect on community visits, let's just say, but before it hit in the first year, we visited 8 communities just before the pandemic, and we've been hosting virtual events ever since. We engaged over 400 community members that have participated in our workshops and events and helped NAN understand what their housing experiences were. These photos are from some of the engagements we held in NAN First Nations. As I mentioned earlier, during each community visit, we sat down with leadership, housing managers, elders, education directors, health staff, youth councils, and any other community member. It's important to think of this as a holistic system and the need to talk to all these people within the communities to reflect that lived experience. We had great conversations with people, and these discussions will continue to be a very important part of implementing the NAN housing strategy.
Next slide. Yeah, so the NAN housing strategy roadmap. The NAN Chiefs in Assembly passed a mandate this summer, accepting the NAN housing strategy and roadmap for implementation with resolution 2212. The roadmap, as it is, will be presented in a high-level overview of implementing the NAN housing strategy. So the NAN housing strategy encompasses a vision for creating positive change in the current housing systems to support health and wellness and to fulfill the human right of access to adequate housing. The 7 themes are broad because the process will always be dynamic. As we know, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. The roadmap consists of 7 themes, which includes strategies that focus on creating change in housing system. Short and long-term goals are identified within each of the 7 areas, as well as expected achievements once goals are met. As I mentioned on the last slide, these themes have been developed from NAN community members, sharing their experience and knowledge of housing and infrastructure. The themes present a holistic understanding of what is needed to change current housing systems, to support community health and well-being, and to support community self-determination. The NAN housing strategy roadmap includes 7 themes: advocating for inclusive housing systems, addressing health impacts of housing, appropriate and sustainable design and materials, integrated infrastructure planning, alternative funding structures, governance and policy reform, and capacity development and training. So across communities, members talked about specific demographic groups experiencing unique challenges in accessing housing, such as youth, single adults, elders, and those in need of emergency housing. Housing solutions for these populations in our communities need to go beyond providing physical shelter, but also supportive services needed to succeed in homes needs to be understood. In order to advocate for appropriate housing and supports for all NAN members, understanding housing journeys is key to advocating for change. We are working to understand youth journeys to accessing housing on and off reserve, document how the concept of home can be an important tool in building community wellness moving forward, support the development of community-based models for a continuum of care, support the development of models for emergency housing continuum.
So when we think about all these projects that you're seeing listed on the bottom, they're projects that are currently underway that take off of the housing strategy. We didn't want to wait until the end of making the strategy to begin parts of the work. So you see the projects listed underneath of that. That's projects that are currently happening within NAN that lead out from the strategy. So when we think about what we're working towards, we know that the health impacts of inadequate housing and related infrastructure within NAN territory have been shown to lead to poor outcomes for community members, including the most vulnerable of the population. As you know, the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated issues of overcrowding, poor indoor air quality, and greater spread of communicable diseases. The true impacts of inadequate housing and infrastructure must be properly understood to improve the physical and mental health of community members. As well, we need to begin to think about how we can measure individual and community well-being as it relates to the condition of housing infrastructure. So we aim to address the ongoing health impacts of inadequate housing and infrastructure. And you can see the project that's underway right now to think about of the indoor air quality studies within the Sioux Lookout First Nations, the Health Authority with CHIO. I've lost my place here. So the next is design and materials. In our engagements with community members and housing professionals, we've heard that housing designs and materials are not appropriate for the climate and the geography of the North. Oftentimes, the current housing packages sold to our communities are based on housing designs and materials found in southern suburban Ontario. So housing managers and leadership identified that current funding mechanisms, program timelines, and existing capacity to manage on reserve housing often does not allow First Nations to focus on the pre-construction process that could generate more locally appropriate designs. So we're actually taking the pre-construction process and really focusing on that and building toolkits to help NAN members navigate the system. So throughout the process of co-creation and by working together with community members, we can create alternative housing designs that better meet the needs of NAN community members and support First Nations to build and develop housing, directly addressing the housing emergency. Another way to think about this is occupant-led design projects should be undertaken with all populations identified and experiencing specific housing need. Designs and implementation plans should be then distributed to all First Nations, allowing for widespread adoption of new housing designs. So the projects we're looking at are co-create housing solutions with youth and to develop shovel-ready housing projects and community designs for those in greatest need. So when we outlined those in greatest needs from the populations earlier, youth, elders, housing with supports, and emergency services. Next is integrated infrastructure. We've heard and recognized that housing and infrastructure planning and development should be part of an integrated process. Community leaders and housing professionals across the territory described how housing development in their communities is being limited to existing infrastructure and land capacity. The current disconnection between housing and infrastructure funding programs, you can all relate to that, housing over here, the stuff that actually makes the housing work over here, isn't working. When we think about major and minor capital, it doesn't support wellness and health of our communities. They need to be thought of as moving together. Housing infrastructure policies, programs, and funding mechanisms should be designed to directly support community identified needs using an integrated approach. Only until housing infrastructure plans are integrated as part of a full systems change can the housing emergency actually be ended. So we're working to advocate for governments to address NAN's immediate housing and infrastructure needs and support the development of integrated community housing and infrastructure plans. So some of the related projects are the true cost of housing. We've probably reached out to you, but if you feel like you have information that you can share on costing and what it truly takes and costs to build a house in the north, we're gathering information across the Anishinaabe Nation to be able to lobby for greater funding amounts. The immediate needs and infrastructure needs technical report and the Anishinaabe Nation-wide infrastructure needs assessment are underway and some of them completed. The next is funding structures. Stable, predictable funding and programming is needed to support local housing systems. Within NAN, a number of homes built annually is losing pace and the existing housing need and replacement need, forcing members to live in overcrowded homes and forcing members away from their communities into urban centers. Additionally, for decades, the cost of housing in northern and rural remote communities has substantially higher, and this gap continues to increase with the changes to the cost of construction materials and freight. Together through the project that I was speaking about before, which is the true cost of housing, with community cooperation, we're hoping to advocate for what the true cost of housing is within the north. This is my call out to please call us and get involved in that project. So we will be advocating for change to create long-term sustainable funding streams which meet community needs, align funding cycles with building seasons, and hopefully do not put communities in competition with one another.
So First Nations self-determination of local housing systems, from community planning and housing design to governance, is essential to achieving lasting change. First Nations have the right, as stated in United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, to create, maintain, and strengthen their own housing institutions with the ensured support of government partners, a right which is not currently being fulfilled. Current process and policies need to be reviewed and updated in order to fully realize First Nations control of housing. NAN will support the transfer of care and control of housing to First Nations through a process that revises current federal housing policy and supports capacity within the community to manage and maintain successful housing system and governance models. Without housing managers and support staff to operate and maintain related infrastructure, the current housing crisis will only continue. So we're currently working on a few projects. One is to develop appropriate tendering and procurement protocols, identify and develop best practices for data stewardship and management, identify best practices of building standards in the north, and also support the transfer of care and control of housing to First Nations. I think that's happening at a few levels. I know the Chiefs of Ontario have had a few engagements on that topic. They do have a mandate from the Chiefs of Ontario, and also at the AFN level, that's happening as well, the national level. So a reliance on external labor for housing development creates economic leakage and misses an opportunity to create jobs and local economic development. Housing professionals share their significant skills training gap exists, and that interested community members face significant barriers to obtaining accreditations of credentials for working in the housing system. To support long-term sustainability of housing systems, it was identified that pathways towards skills training must be created and local labor forces supported within the community. So we work to support training programs and pathways for developing housing capacity within community. So right there, just one of our projects, growing bioheat in NAN. This was it was a wood stove changeover program where we changed out the whole wood burning system, all the way from the non-combustible floor mat all the way to the exterior chimney. We brought in a trainer from who is wet certified. So we trained community members to become certified wet installers and trainers. So that project is still ongoing. In the roadmap, you'll notice these projects are referenced as current actions as we are taking to support housing needs in our communities. One of the first projects that was developed out of the NAN housing strategy work is creating a home for our youth. This project looks to understand the youth housing journeys and the work they need to do to stay housed. So far, we have interviewed 18 youth and are continuing to look for more participants. Through the interviews, we are looking for ways to advocate for change and specific and actionable recommendations that come directly from NAN youth. A home of our own is focused on design of youth-specific housing on reserve, identifying models of home which will meet their specific and unique needs. This project recognizes that there is a diversity of youth in NAN territory who require a range of solutions, many which are not provided currently. We have focused on one possible design and created construction level plans that every NAN First Nations will have access to once finalized.
Other roadmap projects include Recording Our Truth, which works with elders to document how their understandings of home have changed in their lifetimes. The interviews provide documentation of ways in which government intervention and housing system has altered lifestyles. In addition, recordings document the way in which individuals and their families have resisted colonial impact and remained connected to their homelands. The other project, True Cost of Housing, that I mentioned earlier in the north, was developed in the conversations with housing managers and chiefs and councils that identify the gaps in current funding programs. I know from filling out a number of funding programs, I look at the actual cost of the house versus how much will actually be given, and the two don't really match up so well. So in thinking about the housing managers and chiefs and councils identified that. So this past March, we sent out a survey to communities asking a few questions on current housing wait lists, the number of available lots, and common housing costs. We're aiming to provide a more detailed understanding of housing constraints in order to advocate for adequate programs and funding. I know some of the housing managers and chiefs of councils are beginning to process this, but if you have costing information that you're willing to share with us to gather across the NAN territory to advocate for that, please reach out to us. We're also excited to begin a new project after receiving funding through FNHC's Housing Supply Challenge. This is actually the soft announcement of that. It just got announced. So community-led housings for specialized housing in the north will support systems change by giving communities the chance to co-design housing packages that will be appropriate for the north and can be used by all 9 First Nations to address the 3 greatest needs of populations: single adults, housing with supports, and emergency housing. Our goal is to work to create construction sets that First Nations with essentially shopping lists that you'll be able to send and say, I'd like to build one of these, and be able to have the full document completed so that it's a culturally appropriate house that's been designed with First Nations and then also has all the parts of the package together that are already engineer stamped, architect stamped. The project will look to support NAN communities in the pre-development process. So everything from design to tender and procurement and project management, the part of housing development that happens before construction starts. To support this project, co-creations teams are being formed right now by NAN members and frontline service providers who work directly with each of the 3 populations identified through the project. Each team will be partnered with an architect to create appropriate designs that best meet the needs of each population. Obviously, there's a number of Indigenous architects involved in that. So the design work will be supported by the tribal councils and other technical experts to ensure that project deliverables are ready to be used by communities. We're aiming to launch the project later this fall and early winter with an information webinar and beginning design workshops early next year. So if you're interested in participating and being part of one of those teams, again, please reach out.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited about that project that Sheila just mentioned. I know, back when I was at the tribal councils, so I used to work at Windigo Tribal Council and IFNA as a housing coordinator. One of my roles there was a housing inspector, and I know we always talked about having designs ready that are tailored for our communities, and that way we give the communities the tools to build proper houses that are designed by the communities, meant for our communities, meant for the climate geography. So something we're pretty excited to start working on. But also one thing I wanted to mention on top of the implementation of the NAN housing strategy from the NAN chiefs was along with that mandate was they accepted the immediate housing needs technical report, which identified the number of houses currently needed in the NAN territory, which is 7,588. And so it also includes the related infrastructure, how much roads, how many water treatment plants, that would, things like that. So it included all the related infrastructure in that technical report. So we want to end this presentation with this quote from the Ushkadiza Council, NAN's All Young People's Council, because housing is a priority. Every family needs to have their own space to create memories. Everyone has the right to housing that will make them feel safe and well. We appreciate all the guidance from the NAN advisory councils that have helped us through this process, as well as community members and leadership. The NAN housing strategy was developed by the NAN community members as a solution to the needs of their communities. The themes within the strategy represent their voices and areas we need to take action on together. The NAN housing strategy is a pathway forward for making change to housing system in ways that support health and wellness in our communities. So that, yeah, that's the end of our presentation. We thank, again, we thank the Housing Conference for asking us to present, and thank you all for participating today. Thank you much.
Thanks, Mike and Sheila, for the presentation. It's great. Any questions for Mike and Sheila from the audience? Oh, one over here.
Is the roadmap in a report form that we can now read?
It is in a report form. Unfortunately, we were hoping to launch it at the housing conference in mid-November, so it's going to be available in a couple of weeks. We were really hoping the final document would be available today, but it has many levels of approval to go through, unfortunately. So it will be available in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, we're organizing and hosting the NAN Housing Summit, November 15, 16 here in town. And that's where we're kind of launching the NAN housing strategy. The final document will be ready and presented there. Yeah.
Hi, it's Rod Hill from the Director of Indigenous Relations at BC Housing. Just wanted to, thanks. Just wanted to point out, like you talked about the cost of housing and so forth. So one of the areas that we're looking at is the cost of sustaining housing. And what it's looking like at this point, we don't have the actual data at this point, but it's somewhere in the range of 4 to 7% of replacement cost. So if you kind of think about if your construction cost on the home is $300,000, then to sustain the home with maintenance and the ongoing kind of needs for replacement of capital items, that's $18,000 a year. So that will give you kind of a rough framework for what your ongoing costs are. So that's a comment, but then the question, maybe I can first ask the question, is there any other government officials here? Ask CMHC. That's really disappointing. You have a lot to offer and government should be listening. It'd be nice to see them in the room. But, and I represent BC Housing, that's an arm of government, so that we're not perfect and we're trying to listen, but maybe just from your like if you could just comment, what would you suggest to government? Because we really we're stuck with programs, right? And there's some challenges on our side to change programs, but what would you suggest that would be some advice you'd give government in terms of what we could do better?
I'd say the comment about stable funding. I think allowing communities to not have to apply every single year for those funds, it doesn't give them the ability to plan. And from working with the community that I worked with many years ago, we were able to develop a housing plan once we were able to actually work with the government official and sort of say like, okay, like this is how much we were aiming for a year. Is that something that you imagine is doable? And it was within a program, but they were able to sort of say that, yes, you've demonstrated ability, but that began to really change things because we could actually plan ahead. The construction crews could be planned ahead. They knew they would have jobs, and that stability and ability to plan is really, really great. So even taking a program and having it lengthened in timelines, I think is really important because I think the control of funds kind of going back and forth and communities constantly having to apply, that's a lot of energy that they could be using for other things. And so I'd say that that is a major piece. I mean, we worked with communities in our early days, individual communities, writing applications. And I actually used to say, you know, I'm a university professor. If I'm writing an application for somebody, you know, compared to someone that's dealing with a crisis in community, like, who do you think is going to probably have the time to win the money? That's not really fair. And so when we think about communities not being put in competition with each other, but I would say the stable long-term funding that allows communities to plan allows them to build more stable systems.
No, I would agree with that point. Sustainable funding. I know back in June, there was a letter sent out to communities and they had about a four week, I think it was a 3-week timeline to get their application in. And that, you know, as Sheila mentioned, it takes a lot of time, capacity, time. And so that's something, it should be, you know, sustainable funding, needs-based, distributed to all communities instead of kind of pitting communities against each other. And so that's something we had flagged, and yeah, I agree with Sheila's point on that.
Can I add one more thing in there? There seems to be a real move of government officials to require a full housing needs assessment before you can get your funding. That's just another barrier. It used to be housing policies, which we worked with communities to write housing policies, and now it's a needs assessment. I think the need's pretty clear and it's been articulated for a long time. And so that when Mike talked about the data we'd gathered about the number of houses, the number of infrastructure that would be needed to support that whole system, that's not going to be in the direct roadmap because the document would be so thick, but it does direct you to where to go to find those different pieces of data to advocate for your communities. And it is available at NAN. It's all NAN owned data. I think that's really important fact, but that's just, if I have the ear of BC Housing, I know that they're doing a bunch of housing needs assessments right now. And I would say, stop, take the money, put it towards capital funding. We already know there's great need.
Hi, I'm Dale Murphy, Housing Director at Begunny Nation in Brockett, Alberta. Thanks for having me here. I'm impressed with what I've seen. This gentleman here, I agree with him 100% that why isn't a governance person available here to answer questions? I agree with you also. I remember where we had to have 3 weeks to get stuff ready for funding. And if we don't get it, then we don't get the money in. Funds need to be coming in properly more. It seems like it's right across the nation that we all have the same problems with housing. We have over 500 houses on our nation where we're from, and to try to sustain them also every year with the prices. And it seems like the government doesn't realize that material is going up, labor, everything is going up, but we stay at a certain bracket where they say, well, we got your money ready for you for the next 5 years. Well, how can that be possible when everything keeps going up? So I think that, yes, we have to lobby to get them here more so we can speak to them and have them understand where we stand as a nation right across the country. Thank you.
Hello. I'd like to say thank you to Fort William First Nation for allowing us to meet with you guys here. And my name is Dolly Messikash. I'm from Mishkigogmang First Nation. I'm the housing manager there. And I'm in agreement with my First Nation, we struggle with adequate housing for our elders and our youth. And the fact that we always have a timeline to submit our applications, and if they're not complete, they're not approved and stuff. And the other thing that's really bothering me as a housing manager is the fact that we're only getting these homes delivered to our community where our membership is lacking experience from building a home from the foundation up. And the fact that these homes that are being delivered are constant upkeep. Almost every day, there's something wrong with these homes. So I'm really, lately I've been, at first when I started being a housing manager in my First Nation 2 years ago, I was happy with the delivery of the homes until I started seeing the negative comments from my tenants and the membership of the community, and the lack of space and the demands that these big companies need, that they're demanding their payments and stuff like that, but not providing the services and the quality of the homes that we need in our reserve. Where they, I guess you could say I'm the upfront, like outspoken housing manager on my reserve, where if I don't like something, I will bring it up to whoever it is that's next in line. And they avoid me. The people that deliver the homes, or what they do in the community is they avoid my phone calls and stuff like that, because I will tell them I'm not satisfied with the product, but they go ahead and sweet talk the chief and council. Well, this is how much is this going to be, but it does, they don't tell them about the effects of the loan, like with the, because we're in a community that you could drive in, but at the same time our lands are like swampy, and there's clay, there's rock, bedrock, stuff. It's all mixed together. So it's really hard to find suitable homes, especially now when everything's just being delivered. And this is my second round as being the housing manager. And when I was the housing manager in 98 to 2004, we built homes where it also grew, like the people within the community were happy. They were getting experience through the building part of homes and stuff like that, saying, oh yes, I did this, I built this, I helped build this. And the fact that we're really lacking in experience, especially in carpentry, plumbing, and electricity for our community members. And I find that there's a lot of youth that are very interested in these kind of training opportunities, where me as a housing manager, I do look for funding. I look out there for funding to see if there is a possibility, especially with my program. I have my my tenant relations officer with me on this meeting, and I actually met the deadline. I think I was almost 2 minutes late for my deadline to get her on board. But that's how it is. It's last minute. CMHC doesn't have the with me, with CMHC, the problem that I'm having is I can't secure the training costs, the training dollars, because I don't get the information ahead of time. And it's like last minute, like I only had just half a day, like 4 hours to complete the application to get dollars for somebody to assist me in my work. So I find that the way I look at it in my own personal life is housing is the foundation for the community structure and the infrastructure. And I find that it's the growth, and it is the key element within an organization and the community as a whole. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that comment. I believe we're just over time for this session. So if you have any more questions, feel free, just maybe want to take another one more? Sure. Okay.
Gordon Kakagamak, I've worked for Oshkosh Winjack. My question is, we all know the lack of housing in our communities and overcrowding is community members relocating to the urban centers, almost practically migrating to the urban centers. I'm just wondering, does the non-housing strategy address off-reserve housing? I'm from Sandy Lake. I've lived in Thunder Bay all my life. Back in the 70s, my parents and my siblings lived First Nation, the nonprofit housing in Northwood. Are there similar strategies to create housing for First Nations people in urban centers?
Yeah, this strategy is more targeted on reserve housing. Yeah, we've heard that through our engagements as well. Within our discussions and within our wording, I guess. I know we title that more, we call that forced displacement. You know, when there's that lack of investment in housing and it forces community members off reserve to go to urban settings and municipalities, right? I know a lot of times they'll call it migration, but we like to not like to, but that's just the challenges communities are facing. They're forcibly displaced. So, but yeah, this is more focused on reserve housing.
Thanks so much. And also just to address one of the comments before, the project that we're undertaking right now with regards to creating, co-developing and co-designing special needs housing, it is actually to move beyond the 3 or 4 bedroom house that we know that a lot of the funding structures point towards, but then also, you know, selecting materials that are more robust, that can actually survive more in the north, require less maintenance. You know, that's something that we spend a lot of time researching, the different types of materials and what can, in our opinions, can last, can go into fly-in communities. I mean, I was talking to someone recently and I was just like, how much does your thing weigh? And they're like, weigh? What do you mean weigh? Why do you care about how much it weighs? And I was like, I need to know because I need to know how it compares to this other project and what the freight costs are going to be to bring that in to some place. And I was like, well, what size is it cut in? Can it get in a plane? You know, can it meet my requirements? So those are the different pieces that we're going to really be looking for specifying in different projects. And hopefully we can support communities and helping when they're building even the 3 and 4 bedroom houses to be able to select and design houses for their communities that, you know, use the sun more to heat them. One of the greatest compliments I forgot one time was for a project we were working on. It was being constructed in February. I'm not going to call it the First Nation, but you know who you are. The workers were in the house and they were building it and they didn't have to turn the heat on in the middle of February to actually stay warm to finish the internal, because we'd set it up so well to actually have the sun heating the house so that in the wintertime, you know, they could work in there and not actually even have to turn the heat on at all. I mean, those are the types of things that really work with the community. And I think that was actually one of the cheapest house per square foot that they'd actually built, because we had really thought really together with the community and ourselves how we could actually make that vision kind of come true of what they wanted to sort of more of an intergenerational house, but really looking at the passive house pieces. And those are the things that will be part of the designs that we will be licensing and allowing NAN members. When I say licensing, it's like a free royalty thing, like NAN will share widely with the communities so they can use those and so that they can be built in their communities.
All right, thank you for the presentation.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, we're just running out of time here. We're 10 minutes over. Another session starting at 11 o'clock. So just before everyone leaves, fill out the evaluations at your table. It really helps the conference coordinators determine, get some valuable feedback from you guys. And once again, thank you, Mike and Sheila, for the presentation. And I'm sure you guys will be around for the next few hours. So if anyone else has any questions, feel free to just touch base directly with them. Thank you.